Welcome back to the Indiewood podcast, where we talk about being indie filmmakers and the many hats that we wear, because it's hard to make indie films, and we do these things by wearing many hats. But I think it's important for us to understand what all these hats are doing in order to become better creatives. Each month, I am joined by a guest host from a different filmmaking discipline, and we talk about the craft, learning the things that are crucial to the filmmaking process. And we'll discover how all the different hats we wear can make or break a project. And so this is episode 3, color grading.
I'm really excited.
And as a cinematographer, I feel like color grading is just crucial.
Yeah.
I was looking for a different word, crucial to your workflow.
Mm-hmm.
But tell me about your experience with color, color grading, color management.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, like when you were asking me what disciplines to talk about, and we came to color as one of them. I think it's probably surprising for people to hear that a DP wants to learn more about color, because I should already maybe know a lot about it. I work with a colorist on most of my projects, and so I'm terrible, and I also don't know how to color grade to an extent of like what that workflow is. Like I know you have to like start from a baseline, so you get everything into like a baseline workflow, and then you design your palettes and the nodes and everything. But oh god, it's a nightmare. And I work with some incredible colorists recently I've been working with, so I want to shout out Jenny Montgomery from Company 3 in New York. Is like finding your director, or finding your operator, or finding that key collaborator that you're like, oh, I want to work on everything with you. I feel like she just like understands what I'm trying to do, and I tell her like, oh, I want it to be kind of like this red, or I want it to have this emulation of look, and immediately she just goes there, and I'm like, oh my god, she'll power window certain things that she knows I tried to keep down on set, like match it. And I'm never able to do that. And I think that magic in that eye is such a cool thing. And I was floored when you showed me that fun film emulator you have in Resolve.
Yeah, Dehancer.
Yeah, can you tell me about Dehancer?
Well, so just to rewind a little back a little bit, a power window, you said power window.
Yeah.
A power window is literally a window in your color grading suite. Most likely, let's be real, DaVinci Resolve. And you basically draw a window. It could be a circle, a square, a custom shape over an object, and that masks that object, either the object itself or an inverted version of that. And then you can do things like color just within that space.
Yeah.
Or you can create effects with like a focus roll off, or a blur roll off. I'm sorry. So it's a really cool tool, masking tool, but in color grading suites we call them power windows, and they can be as small as like going over the iris of your eye,
which I do
face.
all the time. So for my feature, I asked Jenny to go over and make people's eye light brighter. And so she literally would power window eyes and track them into certain shots where I wanted eye light to be bigger
That's
and
interesting
brighter.
That you mentioned that. Eyes are so important in a film. I forget his name. He did Only God Forgives, Drive. Nicholas Winding Refn. He has this thing about eyes. So his director, or his VFX team, went through the entire film and took out everybody blinking.
Love that.
Which is crazy. And I think it does have a subtle effect, because then you look at the scene and like, oh my god, no one's blinking.
Which is the opposite of that book In the Blink of an Eye, which teaches people how to edit. And it says you cut on the blink or after the blink.
You know what? You can remove the blink completely, and then you just cut wherever you want.
I know. But I remember that from like film school readings.
So we were talking about
eye light and Jenny and
doing power windows specifically, and you asked about Dehancer. And Dehancer is, I think, it's part of this weird ecosystem of tools called film emulators. Yeah. Well, they'll try to emulate a film stock either from photography or from motion picture stock onto digital. Yeah. And honestly, like, everyone's got their own flamer. Everyone's got their own flavor, and it never looks exactly the same, because the film look doesn't exist, because depending on how you expose your film stock, even the age of the film stock,
and how you process it,
and how you scan it, and then also how you grade it, fundamentally changes how it looks.
Which used to be called timing instead of grading.
Color timing.
Yeah.
And so, but in the end, you always print to this, like even when you do a digital intermediate, which is you scan the film, digitally color grade it, and then print it back to film. When you print back, you print a film stock that also has its own kind of thing. So when you actually like render out a piece of footage that's going to print film, it's going to look not graded because it has, it needs to be kind of prepared in a certain way. And then that extra layer of film stock kind of adds a little flavor to it. So there's, a whole world of film that people want to explore. But, there's now these digital tools that you could do it with. And Dehancer is one of them. And it's fun. I think for me, it's less about having it as a tool for color grading and more about a tool for making my images look fun.
Yeah.
It's like a really, God, I don't want to say this. It's like a really high-end Instagram filter.
Don't say it. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not judging you. It's true. It's like it's a layman's way of putting it. I love it. Yeah.
Like just for people who don't know what any of what I just said means, it all these tools are basically just really like complicated high-end Instagram filters, which is fine.
And I will say like something I learned about with Jenny when asking her about, a lot of the time, depending on the director, I'll find like that I love like a 16200T, which I think is 7217 Kodak stock originally, and we'll do that as like a digital emulation on top. But I realized that the software that a lot of them use, colorists, and I don't know if it's Dehancer or another one, is that not only are you controlling the population of the grains, so like quantity of grain and how present it is based off of the size of the grain you're picking, but also the transparency of the grain, which is not something you do in actual film. You don't choose the transparency. Another
thing that people don't think about there's, just to kind of lay the foundation for this, there are different versions of film grain. You can have overlays, which is, we recorded a film grain from whatever film. Now just overlay it, do a certain kind of blend mode and, do opacity to taste. And then some are like, we have a like algorithmically driven grain generator, which is for every frame you get a different kind of grain that's specifically like engineered to look like film. And I think what people don't realize is film grain isn't just dots of different kind of luminosity, it's also color. And how your lens choice also affects that is important. And so when you think about grain, it's not just about kind of that like texture, but also the color of it. And on top of that, what's really cool,
and luminance.
And what's really cool about that is you can actually make an image perceivably more sharp by adding in grain. So you have an HD image, you can give it texture and make it look more sharp, versus just doing a sharpening filter on it.
Or you can make it look softer depending on the size of the granule.
There's a whole lot of stuff, and
so fun.
It's affordable to do because you can just have How
much is Dehancer? It's like $229 or something.
I think when I paid it was around $300.
Okay,
but it's a lifetime license.
Yeah,
and you can get 2 seats for it, which is cool. But that doesn't mean you need it, because if you just want to play with grain, for example, you can get an overlay. And while it won't be a perfect like 1-to-1 for film, it's still something that adds a little bit of texture and can elevate your image a little bit, just because it can soften, it can hide things, it can hide imperfections, it can just a little je ne sais quoi. But having said that, just a simple like video overlay isn't always going to be the best thing for you, because grain is affected differently depending on if it's the highlights, the midtones, or the shadows. So there's a lot to kind of explore there, and I think film grain can deserve an episode all in and of itself.
Yes, I agree.
But in the grand scheme of things, it's a very small part of color, and I think one of the last things that we do, and especially like, if you're going to if you have a digital film that's going into to theaters, add grain. But if you're delivering to YouTube, don't use grain.
Oh, why?
Because YouTube has this weird compression algorithm that is very efficient, but if there's a lot of movement in your frame, it'll condense it. And so when you,
so it's quicker to play when someone
Yeah.
loads it and it thinks it's going to have to run your CPU higher or something, and so it tries to calculate.
it's less about your computer and more about YouTube's end.
Oh, okay, got
and
it.
I'm gonna kind of butcher what's happening,
okay.
but I'm gonna try to paraphrase it. It's to make it more efficient. The compression takes all that fine movement and it just has such a hard time with it for some reason. I'm not sure specifically why, but it'll just scrunch it.
Wow.
So like it'll block everything into a single kind of pixel almost, right? Because it's too fine of a detail.
Yeah.
So like if you have like a really finely textured shirt and you you wear it for like a YouTube video, it will have issues showing that on the delivery end. So if you use grain, everything's so fine that your compression will just completely and utterly ruin your footage.
What
so
would
remove
you
your grain.
recommend
Don't use
instead?
grain at all.
Or if you want to use grain, Vimeo or what?
Vimeo has it's better, but anything is gonna if you're gonna send people files with grain, just download them and put them on Google Drive and send
Google
them
Drive, got
with
it.
Frame.io maybe.
Yeah.
Because
I
honestly,
feel like, that
anything
might
is
be
going to
solve.
compress your footage, to hell and back.
Yeah.
But for me, I think the coolest thing about color grading is how many different variables you have and how every single variable affects your entire image pipeline. So you have your camera color space, your timeline color space.
Yeah, dude.
You have your delivery color space, and it all depends on where it's going. And thankfully, if you're going to theater, you're going to do, I think, P3, and then if you're going to anything else like broadcast or YouTube, it's Rec 709, which is like fine. Okay, you can go to those two, and you're okay. And then I think, oh my God, I think Netflix wants delivery in Rec 2020, which is like a larger color space. Anyways, so
but your white points are all different.
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
the hard part, I think, is because from beginning to end, you're having to think about that.
And I want to say to folks that are kind of like really wanting to know, what's the best? The one thing that really really bothers me is like, what are the best settings? Whatever you want them to be.
Yeah.
I think whatever makes it look good to your eye. If you have a display that's properly calibrated, which is fairly affordable now.
And most rental houses will do that.
Exactly.
So
they
have to.
Yeah.
So.
And so you can see what your image is going to look like. But then the problem is no monitor, or unless you're going to a screen, and even then, like a movie screen, even then it's all, there could be differences depending on which theater you're going to. But no display is the same. Phones, laptops, TVs, monitors, everything has a little bit of a different kind of manufacturer color shift.
And that's why ACES was created, right? Because they wanted to try and standardize it.
Kind of.
Future-proof it?
From my understanding, it's that, but also to have a color space big enough to include
Rec 709, Rec 2020,
and
P3.
beyond.
It's like future-proofing so that no matter where we go in the future, we're able to see the film as it was intended, right?
And we can go back to films shot in the 90s and show films in the 2050s. Sorry, not the 90s. But when was ACES? It was like 2010s?
2010, yeah.
Yeah, roughly. And so
is that the aughts?
Yeah, 2010s.
Okay.
The aughts are the 2000s.
I love saying aughts, so I just wanted to throw it in there.
I was an aught kid.
When do I ever get to say that? So, yeah.
Right? Yeah, so if you see a movie from like 2020, maybe not 2020, 2019, and you see it in 2060 or 2050, they can then go back, if it was shot on ACES, restructure, recolor, regrade, reprint into whatever this new larger color space is that we're using for exhibition, which is cool. Yeah, which is cool. But the thing is, the problem is even if you use ACES, people are still going to watch your movie on like a Vizio that has like motion
turned on,
motion
blur turned on,
and has like a magenta shift, and it's using that like cinema, and it's just going to look bad.
This happened with, I was watching The Bear with my partner, and we have a projector, and it was like playing, and I was like, he's a director, and I sit beside him and I go, yeah, that doesn't look right.
No, yeah.
And he goes, what? He's like, they probably shot it that way. I said, no one would allow that to be released that way. That's just not. And he was like, okay. And so for 30 minutes, we paused the episode, and for 30 minutes we tried to figure out what setting was on the projector. And then I think we eventually found it in some like deep advanced setting. And then it looked proper, and I went, yeah, that's like the ads I've been seeing. And like it's just like crazy, because you could be sitting there like judging something for the way it looks. I mean, I know I do, unfortunately, just like as a DP, but I like judging it like, why are they allowing that? Like Better Call Saul has a very specific aesthetic, but on certain TVs that have contrast turned on, it looks terrible because they cannot handle the highlights. And so I'm like, that's really like shitting on someone's work.
But the thing is, the people that are most important to that piece of, you know, art, for lack of a better word, don't care, don't know. I went and saw Haunting of Venice, and same thing in the theater, just something was off. It was desaturated and the contrast was too high. Something happened, someone screwed up, something was broken. And I went to talk to the people like 4 times and they didn't do anything. But everyone's like, yeah, this is how it's supposed to look.
I know.
And I was like, no. And so when I went home, I showed my wife. I was like, this is the trailer. These are the scenes. And
there
like,
you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's different. So I think when it comes to color, you do it for yourself.
You try and do it right.
You try to do it right, but you have to only do it for yourself, because when you get to the end, even in a big theater, it could be screwed up and nobody's going to be, oh, that's a great movie.
And the cost of like a DCP for a festival is so expensive. And like, you know, and that includes, because the DCP. And
so for those listening at home or watching, a DCP is called a digital cinema package, which is a specific set of files that go to movie theaters for their digital projectors. Yeah.
And I find that is something, this is more like from a producer brain, but I feel like that's something that people don't factor into their budget.
They don't know.
Especially short filmmakers or independent filmmakers don't know that they're factoring in, unless you have a school who provides it for you for free, like $1,000 to $2,000 for a short film in order to get a proper DCP.
We had a web series that we did in New York, and I don't know why I emphasized New York. In New York!
Yeah. I've been to New York. I've traveled there. I'm a world traveler. I might be from LA, but I've been in New York. Yeah.
Oh, man. Bi-coastal gal. So we did a film, and then we got into Dances with Films, and I think our DCP was like several $100s.
Dude. Yeah.
And we just didn't even think about it. I was like, oh, we can just send you like a H.264 file. They're like, no.
Yeah, they're like, here are the rules for the DCP, when we're going to need it by. And then, you know, these production houses get like last minute, like, oh, we need this DCP. And they're like, well, we're going to rush quote you. And then you're at like $1,500 for a 12-minute film. And you're like, oh my God.
And you can't do it on your own, which is crazy. I
mean, you can try. You can have a good editor who tries to do it for you, but it's hard because it's single images, right? It's like a sequence, it's a TIFF sequence.
I don't know how it's structured, so I'm going to just trust you on that.
Yeah, I don't know.
But it's I don't want to say proprietary, but it feels like it's proprietary because you have to go through like all these weird hoops. You can't just be like DaVinci Resolve, Premiere Pro, render a DCP. It should be. You should be able to do that.
Right?
And for anybody listening at home, please do that, because I feel like it's just a business model that takes advantage of filmmakers. I'm sorry. Not sorry. But yeah, it should be that simple.
There needs to be some affordable way of doing a DCP.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's probably YouTube tutorials out there on how to make your own DCP.
There are.
I bet it's, you know, trial and error to some extent. Yeah.
And then even then, if you make your own, you can't really like trust the integrity of it.
Right.
100%.
And then you see it on the theater and you're like, oh, yeah. So it's one of those things. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like color grading, you know how to give direction as a DP or a director when you get in with a colorist. You know like what you want. You've been working with the project for so long. You have your references. Like you know what you want it to finally look like. But it's all the things outside of actually have like knowing what you want that are the things that get in the way often.
I think the coolest thing for you to explore would be having a display LUT. And so what a display LUT is, it's called a lookup table. And it's just a set of it's a grid of numbers that translates one color space into another. And this could be for technical reasons. So you can have, you know, a log image from a camera transferred to a Rec 709 color space, or you can have it be a creative thing like, oh, let's take this Rec 709 color space from this camera and make it a film emulation. So it's cool, but also I think it's one of those tools that has become the one-click color grade, which is you can do it fine, but it's just gonna look.
I've had like a lot of the DPs in my year at AFI worked like years on their own show LUTs, like creating their own. And I've never gotten into that workflow yet. I want to eventually do it because currently the LUTs we're using right now are like a classic K1S1 or, stuff like that. So eventually on a bigger project, I might look at doing show LUTs or how to create your own. Because I think it's really interesting, that process of like, why am I treating my highlights that way? What are the rules around shadows? Why is green skewed this way, or why am I appropriating what tungsten is, for this narrative? And I think the small shifts like that are the things that are like subconsciously perceptible to an audience and kind of tell your story in a different way. I just need to figure out how to do it.
So just to expand on that, because you said for people creating their own personal LUTs and also kind of, something that mimics a film stock or a look, and for a display LUT, it would be something you would create in your editing software, Resolve, and then you would put it into your camera. So whatever raw and or log image your camera is producing, it would display to you this kind of unique look that you've created. And I've seen people be like, oh, I need my own custom kind of visual for that. And they did this for the Joker. They created their own custom look that kind of mimics the feeling and vibe and film look that they quote unquote film look that they wanted. And then I've also seen folks do what's called cinema based, I guess, exposure. I'm sure someone much smarter than I would be able to explain it a bit better. But the concept is that because you're in a movie theater, your exposures and your skin tones are actually towards the lower half of your histogram because it's so dark and you don't need it to be that bright. And that's where that kind of like cinematic look comes from, where all the midtones are kind of actually lower on the histogram than they would be, let's say, if you shot a video for your phone or whatever. And so what some folks are doing is they're creating a LUT specifically for that exposure balance.
But why they're doing that too is because normally we're told as DPs to light higher because in color we'll bring it down because we want the information. And so that allows you to see, okay, to what extent percentage wise, if I'm lighting 10% above or 20%, what the final will be, what will it actually end up looking like? Because it's hard on set to communicate as a DP to producers, directors, and whoever's looking at the monitor, which is everyone nowadays. Like, oh, it's not going to really look like later we're going to bring it down. Like it's going to be actually like dusk or like, it's going to, And because a lot of people are, although we're all in a visual medium, a lot of people look at it and they're like, is that how it's going to look? And you're like, no, we just need to make sure we have that so that when we bring it down later, the information is there and we're not crunching.
It's such a crucial tool for communicating what the final product is going to look like, because sometimes you have stakeholders look at a log image and like, why is it so washed out? Where's the color?
The biggest fear as a DP is your director gets used to that look and
God.
then is in edit and gets used to it because they're looking at it for hours. They looked at it on set, and then when you start to change it or add contrast, and this has happened to me, directors freak out and they're like, well, that's really contrasty. I'm like, you have been looking at a flat image, like so you make sure that your LUT's always on for the director and producer, and then you have the log image separately, unless you have a really technical director, I think, who kind of understands that the LUT's off right now, because it can really be a shock for a lot of directors who are with that footage for a long time.
No, you're totally right. And it's interesting because you can go a step further and create something like, oh, we're going to shoot day for night. So you can create a LUT that's day for night. You can, be like, what's that trope? Is like, oh, when you're in Mexico, everything looks orange. And you can create those looks that you can build into the camera, and they're not baked into the image.
Yes, correct.
So you can still get your clean, raw, and or log image for color grading, but then they can use that LUT for reference or as a starting grade. And speaking of DCPs, unlike DCPs, they're really easy to make and really affordable in Resolve. You can make them fairly simply, but the thing to consider when folks are making when they're cooking their LUTs at home is you have to make sure that the color space you're making them for matches the camera that you're using. Because sometimes what's happened with my workflow is because I was using multiple systems, whatever the color space that I had that I made this LUT on top of just didn't match my camera. And when I plugged everything in, it was like, oh, you wanted brown or blue? Or,
which is why I think we'll call it a transform LUT instead of a display LUT, because it's not for visual purposes or aesthetic. It's more to like tell the math to go from here to here.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited about this episode. I thought this was fun with a lot of like technical knowledge for people out there and getting into it.
Yeah, no, this was a fun episode, and I feel like we can talk a whole lot more.
Oh gosh, I know.
We'll have to do a season 2, Electric Boogaloo, and have you come back on and talk more about color.
I mean, we just need to get like a grain specialist in here, or get someone from Live Grain in. I've always wanted to hear about that.
Yeah, because that's an interesting thing too.
It is.
Yeah.
TBD.
Yeah. Well, we have one more episode to do, so we'll see everyone next week. We'll talk about music. Do you know anything about music?
I know I like it.
Okay.
That's about it.
Well, there's a lot to explore there then. Thank you for listening to the Indiewood Podcast. You can find us on anywhere you find your podcasts and on Instagram at IndiewoodPod. See you next time.
From the CFA Network, Cinematography for Actors is bridging the gap through education and community building. Find out about us and listen to our other podcast at cinematographyforactors.com.
Cinematography for Actors Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit. For more information on fiscal sponsorship, donations, because we're tax exempt now, so it's a tax write-off, and upcoming education, you can email us at contact@cinematographyforactors.com. Thanks.